I'm joined now by Texas State Representative James Talarico. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are right now working your way through the end of the session, the state legislative session in Texas. The legislature just passed a bill regarding the Ten Commandments that's making national headlines right now. Can you explain where that bill stands and what the implications of having a bill that mandates the presence of the Ten Commandments in classrooms is?
Yeah, this bill would force every single teacher in the state of Texas to post the Ten Commandments in their classroom. This is in every public school across the state. And it just passed both chambers of the Texas legislature, and now it goes to the governor's desk. Greg Abbott has already promised that he'll sign this bill. And if it's signed, it will go into effect this upcoming school year. Now, I anticipate there will be court challenges because this is blatantly unconstitutional. As you know, we have a separation of church and state in this country, or at least we did. I like to think we still do. In the First Amendment of our Constitution, both the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government from establishing a state religion, and the Free Exercise Clause. And obviously, the government, the legislature in this case, elevating one religious tradition over all the others and putting a religious document on the walls of public buildings, public schools in this case, is a clear violation of that establishment clause. So we'll see how those court challenges go, but this is certainly a serious and grave attack on our First Amendment in this country.
Well, not only is it unconstitutional, but what benefit are these legislators who are passing this bill suggesting that students are going to derive from having this overt display of religion in the classroom? Notwithstanding the fact that this is what they're spending their limited bandwidth on, that your limited resources on in the legislature, but how are they selling this to the people of Texas as in any way some good use of time?
Well, they've got to be careful because they can't admit that this has a religious purpose, which is a little absurd because we're talking about a religious document, the Ten
Right.
Commandments. And so they couch this in terms of a historical heritage, meaning the Ten Commandments were somehow essential for our founding fathers and the creation of our founding documents. And that's why they should be put in our public schools, essentially as a piece of history, not a piece of theology. Now, that I think most folks who hear that argument can kind of see right through it. And in fact, I asked the bill author in the Public Education Committee that if she wants to post a foundational document on the walls of every classroom, why not post the U.S. Constitution on the walls of every classroom in the state of Texas? And the video that's on TikTok and Instagram, you'll see that she's kind of stunned into silence and can't even answer that basic question because it does go right to the heart of her argument. If we're talking about a foundational influence in this country on our educational system, our judicial system, on our governmental systems, obviously the Constitution fits that bill much better than the Ten Commandments. And again, I'm a person of faith. I love the Ten Commandments. I've tried to build my life on the Ten Commandments. But as a Christian, I know that the separation of church and state doesn't just protect the state, but it also protects the church. And we always get in trouble as believers when we ally ourselves to governmental power. And that's what I'm trying to avoid in the Texas legislature.
And by the way, let's put that clip of your exchange right here.
You know how important the Ten Commandments are to me, and you know how important my faith is to me. And we have an honest disagreement about the role of the government in this kind of policy. So I just want to have a conversation about that. I think you answered this in the first sentence of your layout, but why do you want to require the Ten Commandments in every classroom?
Because they are foundational to our American, both educational and judicial systems.
Do you think the Constitution is foundational to our country?
I do, and I'm so proud that in the Declaration of Independence, that God is mentioned in the the two opening paragraphs and the two closing paragraphs. So it was really foundational to our forefathers, even in the Declaration of Independence.
Why doesn't your bill mandate teachers post the Constitution in every classroom instead of the Ten Commandments?
That might be a great bill. It's just not this bill.
Would you accept an amendment?
If you want to write that bill, I would JA it with you. But that is not this bill.
Well, we may have the opportunity. Would you accept an amendment to require the Constitution be posted next to the Ten Commandments in every classroom?
It actually would blow up the bill because that does not fit under the caption of this bill.
I've already checked. It would be germane because the bill is regarding Ten Commandments being displayed in classrooms. We would just require.
Your amendment would be a very different thing, and no, I would not accept that.
We would require.
But you know what? Next session, if you want to do that, I would be happy to help you with that.
We would require that the display of the Ten Commandments just happen next to the Constitution. So certainly germane to the bill.
No,
it
is not.
Do you think that the Constitution should be posted next to the Ten Commandments?
That has nothing to do with this particular bill.
Well, not about your legislation, but do you think those two documents should be posted together?
I'm going to stick with the talking points on my bill, if you don't mind. I don't believe that is part of this bill.
You know, what I think is interesting about this moment right now, and also couching it in this idea that this is a historical document and not a religious document, is, of course, the pushback to this would be, okay, if we're putting religious documents in the classroom, why not put the Quran up in the classroom or something like that? And of course, they have to figure out a way preemptively to make sure that that's not abused in that way, and that there's just only one avenue for one specific religion's document to be presented in the classroom. But speaking of classroom, you have been on the front lines of the fight against the Republican effort to pass private school vouchers. Now, unfortunately, that has passed the legislature and been signed into law by Greg Abbott. And so what are the practical implications of the fact that now you'll have public funds going to support private schools?
Well, again, things that happen in Texas don't stay in Texas. We tend to be the canary in the coal mine for bad public policy. What starts here usually starts to go to other states and eventually goes to the national level. And in fact, Donald Trump and Elon Musk have both been pushing for a national private school voucher program. This would essentially take money that could go to our underfunded public schools and give those tax dollars to unaccountable private schools that don't have to accept the same students, don't have to take the same standardized tests, don't have to follow the same rules. And what ends up happening in states that have tried these voucher scams is that most of the taxpayer funds go to wealthier families who already had their kids in private school to begin with. So you're taking money out of our underfunded public schools, giving them to wealthy parents who already have their kids in private school. It's a transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. It's reverse Robin Hood. It's welfare for the wealthy. And it's a travesty that this scam has passed into law here in Texas, but we should do everything we can to stop this from happening at the federal level.
And of course, none of that is surprising that we're seeing a reverse Robin Hood scheme on display, because right now we're seeing national Republicans gut Medicaid, gut food assistance programs so that they can offset a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans, where we'll see after-tax income rise. This is according to the Penn Wharton analysis, after-tax income rise for the top 0.1% of Americans by something like $389,000, whereas the after-tax income actually decreases by $700 to $1,000 for the poorest Americans. And so, we're seeing this at the federal level and also the state level.
And that's what makes the Christian nationalist movement even more ironic or hypocritical, because there is nothing more unchristian than stealing from the poor to give to the rich. The Christians in Congress should be feeding the hungry, but they're cutting food stamps. They should be healing the sick, but they are cutting Medicaid. They should be standing up to the billionaire class, but instead they're cutting their taxes. So this movement has no basis in the teachings of Jesus or in any of the major world religions. There is no major faith tradition around the world that says when someone gets sick, you see how much money you can make off of them, right? There is remarkable consistency and overlap between the major world religions about how to treat our neighbors, how to treat the needy and the vulnerable. And so the current Republican majority, both here in Texas and in Washington, have gone far astray from the teachings of our faith.
And can we dig into that for just a beat here? Because I'm coming to this conversation obviously from a place of some considerable degree of ignorance as a secular Jew from originally from New Jersey. Yeah. But what I'm having trouble kind of wrapping my head around is how this is it is such a clear and obvious perversion of Christianity. I mean, it's the polar opposite of what Christianity calls for. And so how do its adherents kind of allow this to happen, see such a gross perversion of the religion, and it be deemed acceptable by so many people?
Well, people in power using religion to benefit themselves is nothing new. We've seen this throughout world history, and it usually ends pretty badly. And so this is just the latest iteration of folks claiming to belong to a tradition, but in fact, they are worshiping power, whether that's social power, economic power, or political power. I think this Ten Commandments bill is such a great example. In my faith, in the Christian faith, the Apostle Paul says that the Ten Commandments are actually summed up in one command: love thy neighbor as thyself. That is the summation of the Ten Commandments. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Love is the fulfillment of the law. That's from Romans 13. And so when I think about that, I try to figure out, is this bill loving? I'm a former middle school teacher, so I always, evaluate these policy proposals through my experience as a teacher. And I remember students who didn't fit in, students who were different. If you're a Hindu student in a Texas public school, you stick out. If you're a Jewish student, a Muslim student, a Buddhist student, a Sikh student, an atheist student in a Texas public school, you're a little different. And that's hard enough as a kid. Now, a bunch of politicians at the state capitol are going to force their teacher to put a poster on the wall that says, "Thou shalt not worship any gods before me." We're forcing their teachers to put up a poster that says their faith is inferior. Their religious tradition is not welcome here. That's going to make their lives harder, not easier. And so I don't think forcing our religion down the throats of those students is love. I don't think forcing teachers to put up a poster against their will is love. And that's why I say that these policies and that Christian nationalism more broadly is antithetical to the teachings of Jesus.
Have there been folks who you've spoken with who may share your religion, share your values, and who may be Republican, who may be Trump supporters, who may have voted for Greg Abbott in that state, who are recognizing the gross perversion of their religion at the hands of this Republican majority, who basically wants to perpetuate this wealth transfer from the poor to the rich?
I can't tell you how many conservative Christians have called and emailed my office over the last few weeks and months and thanked me for not only standing up for public education, standing up for local control, standing up for the Constitution, but also standing up for true Christian values. And of course, I am an imperfect Christian and I fail all the time, but I am at least trying to stand up to those in the legislature who are using my faith tradition to hurt other people, to hurt our neighbors. And I think that's resonating with folks, regardless of their political party. I think we need more of that, not less of that. And for too long, Democrats in particular have ceded religion to the other side. And we have failed to talk about our tradition and how it influences our decision making and our public policy proposals. We have to grasp for moral language when we are talking about politics. If we try to sanitize our politics and try to rid it of all religious influence, then it's going to be this kind of sterile 12-point policy plan that doesn't resonate with anyone.
Yeah.
We've got to get back to a place where we feel comfortable drawing upon these ancient traditions to be able to talk about our politics in a moral way.
Well, look, the reality is that very few Democrats have the tools to be able to do that, and certainly not as well as you have. You have really emerged as a major leader in this space, and you've done it with more, integrity and dignity and empathy and class than I think every single one of these Republicans combined, especially as it relates to Christianity. And so I guess that raises the question. Look, we have a deep bench of really talented folks in Texas, and so what's next for you? Do you have a plan? I know that you're obviously a member of the state legislature right now, but do you have a plan moving forward?
Well, I am totally focused on the legislative session. You just mentioned it's kind of an all-encompassing experience. We only meet for 5 months every other year and consider thousands of bills, many of them very dangerous bills that could do a lot of harm to my constituents. So my entire focus has to be here. But once this session ends in a week, I'm going to take some time to, one, sleep, and then two, think about how I can make an impact going forward, and if that includes a run for statewide office.
Well, looking forward to hearing what's next for you and to continue following your career. For those who are watching, I've known and been friends with James here for a few years now, and so I'm really grateful for all the work that you're doing. Grateful for your voice in this space. Again, a space where Democrats aren't often found, and again, really looking forward to seeing what the future holds.
Well, and I just want to thank you for your work. You mentioned being secular, but you are certainly a voice of moral clarity in our politics right now, and want to thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, thanks so much.